This video was produced for Newcastle Disability Forum's No Steps History Walks project, funded by the People's Health Trust using money raised by the Health Lottery, North East and Cumbria. Newcastle Town Moor is a wonderful green space measuring nearly 1,000 acres or 400 hectares. That makes it larger than Hyde Park and Hampstead Heath combined. It's also quite a bit bigger than New York's Central Park. However, the Town Moor was never laid out as a park, at least not all of it. Exhibition Park occupies one relatively small corner. The Town Moor is a fine example of common land, an area where freemen of the city can still graze their cattle today. In fact, this right dates back to an Act of Parliament of 1774, when a dispute between the freemen and the corporation went all the way to Westminster. But over the years, the moor's been used for a lot of different activities, some more pleasant than others, as you'll hear. Today it's best known for the Hopkins, said to be the largest travelling funfair in Europe. But in the past, it was the site of an aerodrome, a horse racing track, and for many years, the gallows. And it's with this grimmer aspect of the Town Moor that we begin our stroll through the centuries. Witchcraft. Today it's a matter for horror films and Halloween costumes, but in the 17th century, belief in witches was pretty much orthodox for all Christians. It was a brave man who denied the existence of the devil, after all, and if the devil was real, he must have allies among human beings, hence the conception of the witch as someone, not necessarily a woman, who signed a pact with Satan in return for power to do ill to others. Most people have heard of Matthew Hopkins, the witch-finder general, a con man who flourished briefly in the south of England. Less well known, but almost as horrifying, was the outburst of witch hunting that took place in Newcastle in 1650. To understand what happened and why, it's first necessary to look at the city and its surroundings during that turbulent period. The English Civil War started in 1642, when Parliament rejected the authority of Charles I. Newcastle declared for the king, while Sunderland, its rival, supported Parliament. The Scots Presbyterians were allies of Parliament and sent an army over the border, which camped in Sunderland and besieged Newcastle. Newcastle's coal trade was very lucrative, and the king needed the wealth it generated. The city was captured, then a royalist counterattack drove off the Scots, then they came back and captured it again. The city was occupied for 2 years. At the end of the Civil War in 1649, the old royalists had been replaced by a very Puritan corporation. They were just as greedy as their predecessors, maintaining a monopoly on the coal trade that led to widespread resentment. As well as greed, the Puritan corporation fostered belief in witchcraft. These Roundheads were Bible Christians, and according to one very questionable translation of the good book, "Thou shalt not suffer a witch to live." Newcastle's proximity to Scotland also played a part. Scotland was one of the most fanatical areas of Europe when it came to witch hunting. Far more extreme than England. Scotland saw a massive national witch hunt in 1649, and this spilled over into the northeast. A Scottish witch finder was brought to the city by the Puritan merchants who sent out the town crier to encourage people to accuse their neighbours. Soon 30 people had been formally accused and were brought before the magistrates, and the newly arrived witch pricker. The practice of pricking witches was derived from one of the strange beliefs of the time, that Satan furnished his minions with a demon called a familiar. This often took the form of a cat or other small animal. This familiar, the theory went, fed on the witch's blood, and the point on the body where this happened was devoid of sensation and short of blood. So, if you stuck a sharp object into a witch, sooner or later you'd hit a point where no pain was felt and no blood flowed. This was the devil's mark. Find that and you'd found your witch. This is all completely bonkers, but witch prickers had a way of making it work. They were paid by results, 20 shillings per witch in the case of the Newcastle pricker. To reveal the devil's mark, such men often used a false bodkin, like a modern-day stage dagger, where the blade retracts into the hilt. It was trivially easy to demonstrate that every accused person was a witch, but it was also necessary to get a confession. Torture was outlawed in England, but the magistrates still used sleep deprivation and walking a prisoner up and down for days at a time to get them to confess. At the Newcastle trials, 27 accused were found guilty, 2 were acquitted, and in one case a local bigwig demanded a second ordeal. Lieutenant Colonel Hopkins, a Civil War veteran, demanded that the witch pricker repeat his routine under closer supervision. It was seen that, if the woman's skin was broken, blood flowed. Hobson and others also seem to have saved several people from being sentenced to death, but 15 women and 1 man were still hanged on the town moor in August 1650. The remains were buried in unmarked graves in St Andrew's Church. It was the largest mass execution of witches in England. We know all this, by the way, thanks to a book published in 1655 by a man called Ralph Gardner. Entitled England's Grievance Discovered in Relation to the Coal Trade, it savagely attacks the corrupt corporation and links the witch hunt directly to the coal monopoly. It was a stunt to distract and divide the population, Gardner claims. In this book, he also praises a certain Eleanor Lounsdale, a woman who spoke out against the trials. She urged people not to testify and was herself prosecuted. A genuine heroine. But what of the witch pricker? Usually such characters vanish into the fog of history, never to be heard from again. So it's good to know he came a cropper. After getting innocent people killed in Newcastle, he went back to Scotland to try and make some more money from the angry and credulous. But the passion for witch hunting had blown over, at least temporarily. He was arrested by a justice of the peace, one Henry Ogle, and forced to confess that he had been party to the deaths of 220 innocent people. The witch pricker was then hanged. And no, we don't know his name, all we know is that he got his just deserts. Let's move on to happier subjects. In 1721 the town moor saw the first of many horse races. It was a triangular course some 2 miles long. In 1800 a stone grandstand was built, giving its name to Grandstand Road. The Northumberland Plate was the biggest race, beginning in 1833. Racing continued until 1881, when it moved to Gosforth Park. Rabbit coursing and running events were also popular, and, in 1892, the British Baseball Championships. Yes, baseball, a quintessentially American game, was played in England back then, usually by football teams. There's some confusion over who won in 1892, though. One source I checked says Wallsend, another claims it was Middlesbrough. Pot-share bowling, a now obsolete sport, was much loved by miners. 2 men competed to throw a small bowl the furthest distance along a course. Huge crowds used to turn out for matches, which continued until the 1930s. All of these sports involved gambling, of course, part of the local economy since time immemorial. Some of the biggest bets were placed on pedestrianism, the practice of walking long distances over a measured course. In 1822, George Wilson walked 90 miles around a half-mile circuit in 24 hours, watched by a crowd of 40,000. In 1828, Peter Macmillan walked 110 miles in 24 hours. A fortnight later, his mother, Mary, did 92 miles in a day. Other spectacles that drew the punters included aeronautics. The moor was an ideal launch pad for balloons. In 1786, Vincent Lunardi, known as the Daredevil Aeronaut, took off from the town moor. Sadly, a local helper, Ralph Heron, became entangled in the guy ropes and fell 200 feet to his death. People didn't just gather for entertainment, though. On the 27th of June 1838, 70,000 people flocked to the town moor to support the Chartist cause. The Chartists were so called because they gathered millions of signatures on a huge petition to Parliament, the Great Charter. They wanted every adult male to have the vote, among other things. The campaign's leader, Fergus O'Connor, was a hugely popular speaker, and on that day the traffic jams extended for 2 miles. Newcastle Corporation were so scared by the gathering that they summoned the 5th Dragoons and the 52nd Regiment of Foot, who marched in with fixed bayonets. The Chartists were not intimidated and didn't give the authorities any pretext to attack them. The following year they were back, and another orderly demonstration drew a crowd of 80,000 on Whit Monday, 1839. Chartism went into a decline after a massive rally in London in 1848, but it's notable that most of the Chartists' demands were enacted by Parliament before the end of the century. The Chartists always stressed that they were playing a long game. Their anthem, written in 1847, makes that clear. 100 years, 1,000 years, we're marching on the road. The going isn't easy, yet we've got a heavy load. We've got a heavy load. The way is blind with blood and sweat, and death sings in our ears, but time is marching on our side. We will defeat the years. We will defeat the years. We end with a few other bits and bobs of information. In 1916, an aerodrome was built on the town moor to help train pilots for the Great War. In 1921, it was firebombed by the IRA, destroying a hangar and 2 aircraft. And anyone familiar with the western end of the moor might know a patch of fenced-off land at the bottom of Cow Hill. That was the site of a smallpox isolation hospital built in 1882, demolished in 1958. And that seems an apt place to end this little talk, produced during lockdown by me, David Longhorn. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll be back soon.